Hello, good afternoon. Very
Hi.
formal.
Yes.
How are you today?
Good. Yeah, good. Good. Good.
Ex-
You?
Yeah, not bad, thank you. And hello to anybody who is watching. My name is Shell, and I am the founder of the community We Recover Loudly, which is a community of support for people who are either in recovery, looking to go into recovery, for the hospitality industry. Today, there he is. We've got it's Addiction Awareness Week, which is basically, a week where we really kind of think about what it's like to not only have an addiction, but to work with people in addiction and how to support them, and how we can be preventative and all of that. And that's why I called this live. And I'm really grateful that you both joined. But for those people who have no idea who either of you are, would you like to introduce yourselves? Who would like to go first?
Kris can go first.
Okay, thank you.
Age before beauty.
Every time I see you, you get younger and younger, Chief. I don't know how you do it.
It's that Dubai living.
Yeah, Dubai living. It's the life of alcohol and drug-free life. It actually reverses your youthful looks, or increases your youthful looks.
Thank you.
So my name is Kris Hall. I'm the founder of the Burnt Chef Project, and I'm very, very pleased to be supporting Michelle with We Recover Loudly, which is an absolutely fantastic organization, and well overdue in our sector to have such a prominent voice representing those who have struggled and are struggling with addictions within an industry that has normalized addictions quite massively. So thank you for having me.
Very welcome. Over to you, Chef.
So my name's Adam Simmonds. And I've been a chef for over 38 years now. I've obviously, as people may or may not know, have had my difficulties with addiction and mental health. So yeah, I'm very grateful to be here to talk about my struggles, as well as, to see if it's all about helping people, right? And saying that there's a way out, and that there is something that can be done with hard work and determination. And I think that's ultimately where I come from. So yeah, thank you so much for asking me.
Oh, no, thank you very much for coming and for sharing your story. I decided to start the community We Recover Loudly and have that as the name of it for the exact reason you've just shared. We know it's happening in our industry. We also know that there are people in recovery in our industry. But because of that stigma, which is something you talk a lot about when it comes to mental health, Kris, because of that stigma, because of that shame, people are almost as resonant to kind of stand up and say, hey, I'm recovered, as they are to say, hey, I'm struggling. So it's really powerful that you're using your voice to, like you said, help people get that identification. We lost Adam, but that's all right, because I was about to ask Kris a question. Kris, you started the Burnt Chef specifically looking at putting in that support for mental health in the hospitality industry. And, we've kind of gotten to a stage now when we talk about mental health in hospitality, Burnt Chef comes out, it's the first thing that people think about. But I found when it came to addiction that there was slightly more of a hands-off approach from businesses. And I was wondering, with your experience, in that mental health field, how have you found, has there been a change with the way people are looking at addiction, or, that correlation between it not being, is it a mental health disorder? Isn't it? Can't you just, where's your willpower, guys?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, because it's almost completely separate. We cover it in our training, and it always feels a little bit odd, because when we ask people what they've done previously when it comes down to someone who may be struggling, I mean, we've heard harrowing stories of those who are struggling with use of drugs or alcohol. Loss of employment is one of the biggest things. As often, what do we do if someone's struggling with addiction? Well, we fire them. That's what we do. And yes, whilst there's a legal grounds for misconduct on that front, we're just kicking the can down the road. So it's been an interesting one. There's a lot of conversation. We have a lot of conversations about depression and anxiety and certain disorders. But addiction, no one really knows how to handle it, because and I get where they're coming from a organization point of view, because ultimately you can only help someone with addiction if they want to be helped and if they want to recover and they want to go down that journey. And you can't sort of twist their arms behind their back and push them against the wall and say, like, you need to get help now, because it just doesn't work, and historically that it's never worked. So I think that there's perhaps a little bit of fear is perhaps not the right word, but people feel like their hands are tied behind their back a little bit, and so if they don't talk about it, they don't have to deal with it, right?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we've been posting online to promote this live has been a comment that you made, Adam, in the podcast that we recorded for season 1 of We Recover Loudly, which is the #1 downloaded podcast episode, season 1. Just saying, guys. You beat Gizzy Erskine, bless her. Love you though, Gizzy. And that comment was about, you know, why did people not call me out? Why didn't someone come up to me and say something? And the comments from other people have been quite lively about that. You know, well, exactly a bit like Kris said, it's like, well, where do you start? You know, is it almost feels with addiction versus mental health that it's an us problem versus we can embrace you, we can have that community and all of that. You know, I just wondered if you had anything kind of to say on that in terms of what you think we could be doing in those situations to help people.
Well, I think, like I mentioned about training, there needs to be more awareness from anybody, from an outside point of view of how to approach somebody about an issue that they think that they have. You can only, it's an assumption, right? Until you, or unless you have hard facts. And I think if you have an assumption, it's better to approach it in a way that you're not going in like a bull in a china shop, because it don't work. And that wouldn't have worked for me. But what it is about sowing a seed, in my opinion. And ultimately, I put, you know, especially with my relapse, somebody said to me about, you know, we know what's going on. They knew, and I just surrendered and said yes. But that's because they knew that I was in too deep in my relapse. Right in the very beginning, people said that they knew, and I've had people reach out since promoting this today about, we knew, but we didn't say anything. Why we didn't say anything? Because, and then one guy or one chef said to me, we knew it was going on, so we just jumped on the bandwagon as well, really. It's like, that hit home for me, because it's like, fuck. Were they doing that because I was doing it and they knew that I was doing it and they thought it was acceptable to just go on the train? That's terrible. And that for me was quite painful to hear. But that's the reality, I guess. We all have our own choices, right? We can all make our choices and say yes or no, we can continue with this, or no, we can't. And I think it's a fine line. It's a very fine line of how you approach it. Yeah. But that's where the training for me comes in on how to handle those situations.
Absolutely. And we'll talk a little bit more about that just a little bit later on. But I mean, let's kind of just pull it right down to basics. You know, our industry is an incredible industry. I love it. I couldn't imagine working for any other industry. I don't think any other industry would have me, to be honest. Let's be clear. And I do. I think it's a wonderful industry. We have a huge problem with substance abuse and with alcoholism and with other addictions. I'm actually doing a chat on Friday about energy drink addiction and caffeine addiction. We've got vaping, we've got nicotine. You know, this is Addiction Awareness Week. And when we actually look at the industry in terms of all of those things, work addiction. I was addicted to work before I was addicted to anything else. You know, I was a workaholic, which feels like something that you would be rewarded for, like, oh God, not another workaholic. And it destroyed my life nearly, because I was so singly focused. And when I was coming up with the title for this live, I went on to ChatGPT, put in some keywords about what I wanted to talk to, and it came out with the devastating menace of substance abuse. And I thought, God, that's a bit much, isn't it? But actually, it's just so big in our industry. And I don't know, sometimes it feels too big to even start. But I mean, for you, was it always something that you saw as part of, your everyday in the industry? I mean, Kris, you come at it from a slightly different angle because you were sales and stuff. Is it anything that you ever had an awareness of?
So I used to, when I was working and managing sales teams, I used to work in bars and nightclubs in Bournemouth. So I was very much around, and this was on top of a full-time job as well, may I add. So, you'd start at 6 o'clock in the evening shift and work through to 3 o'clock in the morning after doing a 9 to 5 as well. So this is going to sound really, really naive, but in my experience, drug use in my 2 years of working just never happened for me. It wasn't ever used as a driver, but then I'd never really experienced a lot of drug or drug use prior to that point. So it wasn't anything I knew that I had access to. I guess if I did, it probably would have been different. Alcohol use was, yes, it was definitely you would drink 3 or 4 pints after work and then you'd end up cashing in your tips. You used to get people to buy you bottles. And I remember one Christmas I went in with a holdall to collect all of the bottles that I'd managed to purchase. And I guess for my time in life, young sort of early 20s, just under 20, it was fitting, right? It was fun, but that was also just hospitality, and that's what you'd come across. And then I started working with chefs, and things like sweat pints. You work really, really hard in a really hot environment, and you would see drinks being offered up, but the drinks weren't water. They were alcohol, which isn't going to help you. And I'm pleased to say that was sort of 12, 13 years ago, and things have started to change with that, and they have changed quite successfully, I think. But we've managed to change the culture to a certain degree, but what we haven't managed to do is to support those who were struggling in the first place, who were there before the changes and who are now having to carry on with that secret effectively, because it's no longer something that was celebrated within the workplace. So that's from my experience. As I said, there was perhaps a little bit of naivety there, but as I grew up and I started experiencing quite a lot higher levels of stress, those same seeking behaviors, those performance related behaviors, even now, you're tired, so I'll smash down a couple of cups of coffee thinking, I need this. Oh, Adam, are you okay?
It's not like
it was so dramatic.
Hello,
I loved it.
You smash down a load of coffees, or you perhaps just you work even harder for longer hours just because you've got to keep going. So the addiction to stress is something that I'm also quite curious about, that adrenaline rush and that constant drive. But yeah, that's my personal experience of it.
It's interesting you actually said about the addiction to stress, and I was wondering actually what you think about this, Adam. I read a wonderful blog about chefs being addicted to kitchens. So it's not that you're addicted to a substance, but you're actually addicted to being in a kitchen in terms of that adrenaline, that rush. And, you often see chefs being like, I'm there until I'm not, like that. This is me. Did you ever experience an addiction to a kitchen? Is this one we've not done yet?
No, I think throughout my career it's been like that, especially when I was a head chef or an exec and we were striving for accolades, because that was what we did, right? And I was there from morning to night, and it was just part of but maybe that was part of what I had to do in order what I felt I had to do, not what I needed to do, if that made sense. But I think the stress thing, as Kris said, you do become, it's a driver, right? And the adrenaline that you get from that, and from having a good service or even a bad service, I think is always going to be there. That stress, that's the environment that we work in, is stressful. It is. There's no two ways about it. And I think, if you weren't addicted to that, then you wouldn't be doing it, because it's very tiring sometimes. And especially as I've got older, it's like, dear, oh dear, why am I doing this sometimes?
Yeah,
I mean,
supermodels and chef, you don't see them after 30. What are you doing?
So I think there is an element of that for sure. But I think also that comes down to managing expectations of what you want and what and I think the times have moved on from that now. And I think they needed to move on from that. They're not in every sense, but they are changing, or I believe they're changing.
Sorry, there was a quote I found across. So there's a study that I'll share with you, Michelle, that I was lucky enough to meet the professors actually in Bournemouth fairly recently. And they've done a whole study on drug and alcohol use specifically within kitchens and less front of house. But they found a quote in here from Anthony Bourdain, which I thought was quite interesting. And it's commented that a chef never shows up late, never calls in sick, and works through pain and injury. Now, if you're seeing that set as a prerequisite from a respected individual, and Anthony Bourdain was fantastic, don't get me wrong, but if you're seeing that and that's the expectations that we have upon our workforce, then is it any wonder why you do become perhaps comfortable in that kitchen and culture, become almost institutionalized to it, as well as then looking for performance boosting substances and opportunities to be able to continue to be that reliable, dependable, high performing individual.
Yeah, I mean, let's be honest.
There's also ego in there as well, right?
There's ego, but I mean, our industry though applauds those dysfunctional behaviors. We've got to be one of the only industries where you get a pat on the back if you have zero boundaries, no sense of balance, that you put everything into, you leave nothing behind and you get promoted. And I think earlier, I mean, institutionalized, I think that's a scary but brilliant word, because I think earlier in the conversation when there was, things are changing in that, I think that we're in danger of thinking things are changing, but they're not, because that institutionalization, there's a nice long one for the Scrabble books, and that institutionalization and that association of, like, let's imagine the industry, all of these things that we get addicted to are gone. So we're not allowed caffeine, we're not allowed smoking, no alcohol, no drugs. Let's take that away from the industry, just, for a week. Nothing would open.
Well, I'm doing all right.
We'd all just be at Adam's, which I know this is a very flippant thing for me to be saying to imagine, but, if it's not, we're really but somebody has just popped in a comment, those dysfunctional behaviors, you're more likely to be praised for being driven. I mean, that's very true. I mean, how about Adam? Did you find, even though your behavior was incredibly dysfunctional, your drug taking, and again, you've been super duper honest about that, and I really appreciate about having to go in the bathroom, have a line, come back out, look at your chef going, fuck knows what I'm doing right now. Sorry for swearing, everybody. Just realized it was pre 9 o'clock. You talked about how you were praised for being the chef that was pushing through. What did that really make the whole, what you were behaving versus the rewards you were getting, quite a difficult thing to kind of justify almost, because it's kind of justifying your poor behavior in a way?
Yes, it went hand in hand, right? Because I was there all the time and I was producing what needed to be produced for the business, and I suppose for myself with the restaurants. Then it did go hand in hand, but then by the same token, I was constantly battling with myself, with the addiction side of it. And the addiction side of it, as I mentioned, or as I've said before, really started to escalate, I suppose, when I had the pop-up. But looking back at it now and after doing the podcast with you, you look at it and say, well, actually, did it start? It got to a very bad stage at that point. But before that, I was on and off for sure. And I don't know, it's tough because when I was doing it, that was what was controlling me. There was nothing else controlling me, to be fair. But I was able to, what I thought was I was able to perform better than I thought I could. Whereas now it's not. I perform better now, 100%, and I deal with things a lot better. But at the time, I thought, as I said before, I was being more creative. I was this, I was that. But then there were situations where I was put into situations where it's like, well, how am I going to get out of this as far as what was expected of me from an employee, whatever. I think because then it was because you'd set those markers of that you could do this and this within, like I could do a 20-hour day, or there's times when I work all day, all night and all day. Well, that's just fucking mental. It's just like how, it's just the most bizarre when you look back at it. But I wanted to achieve stuff. But the more you did, the more they wanted. The more they wanted, the more you gave. And it was on this, that was how it worked for me. And it was just like a spiral. And then that's when I suppose I started to dabble in that drug taking thing. And then it just went on from there over a number of years. So, but yeah.
I mean, Kris, you must come across this a lot with the places that that Burnt Chef go into. Like Adam's just explained, our industry, we give. We don't get patted on the back necessarily and said, thank you, that's enough. It's like a case of like, but also not only do we attract people who love that kind of energy. That's why we love the industry. We're the kind of people that, we want to be pushed beyond our limits and then be the next day go, great, I got to there today. Where am I going to get to the next time? But the reaction and the fallout from that, not for everybody, but for some, is then obviously what then you see, stress, burnout, the burnt chef. Is there anything that we can do as an industry, or what can we do as an industry that, like we've said, celebrates people pushing themselves beyond limits? And therefore, then we start using substances like myself and Adam did, and not going to talk about blame here. And I have got a question about responsibility for later on. But what can we do? We're almost in a catch-22. We want you to do all of these things, but we also don't want you to burn out.
It's a challenging one, and if it was easy, we would have done it by now. And organizations like yourself, podcasts, opening up dialogue is a fantastic way of getting more awareness and more conversation generated around this subject matter, which is vitally important. I think we've got a couple of different challenges to tackle, and each one will take their own time. A great friend of mine who used to look a lot older than he does now, strangely, once said it's like turning a cruise liner and not a dinghy. And he's laughing because when we spoke, I think about 3.5, 4 years ago, that was something I went, fucking hell, mate, that's really decent. And I still
Our times have changed.
Our times have changed. But interestingly, so we've got a generational shift that needs to happen. We've got a mindset shift of those who have worked to excess, who have become comfortable with their coping mechanisms, or even comfortable, perhaps they are just naturally a lot more resilient and are able to cope with the 70, 80 and 90 hour weeks, the customer abuse, whatever it might be. And they're perhaps, of that mindset of there is no issue here. You've also then got a cultural issue, which is very much around promotion and celebration of certain behaviors and certain processes. And perhaps, then there's a cultural issue with regards to making sure that things like policies and signposting and support and education is correct as well, which again is no quick fix. And then on top of that, so you've got your generational gap, you've also got your cultural gap, and then we've also got the big glaringly obvious thing, which is a supply and demand equilibrium that hasn't been met for years, and it's getting steadily worse because we haven't addressed the first two soon enough. So you have now operators doing whatever they can do to survive because it is flipping tough out there, and operators are struggling in the face of adversity in terms of rising costs, changing of consumer behavior, and also now not enough team members to be able to cope with those peaks and troughs that are becoming more varied by the day, which then puts additional pressures on those who are left, which then gets them seeking into A, other careers, or B, ways of being able to sustain. So is there a quick solution? Unfortunately not. But this is where, as an industry, we need to collaborate. We need to make sure that there are the right supportive mechanisms. We need to educate from the ground upwards and the top down. You know, organizations need to understand that if they do put too much pressure upon people and they find that someone is turning up to work drunk or they are using drugs, that we have a responsibility as an industry to recognize that that person is doing so. Not always. There are external factors as well that we have to be very mindful of, but we have to recognize that we have a part to play in adjusting that workplace environment so that those no longer become needed, or that recovery is facilitated. And I think that's the thing that at the moment, many operators are going to have their hands tied behind their back, because they're like, we can't give people the easy shifts because we need them on the hard shifts. We're not able to facilitate time off work to go to CA or AA or to go visit the doctors because we need them within the business. And I think until we can start to recognize that the sooner we do facilitate those changes and those improvements and those recoveries and that support, the more likelihood our business has of survival long term.
Yeah. I mean, you've said the R word there, and I did as well, responsibility. It's both Adam and I were in a program, a 12-step program, and it's what's worked for us. There are lots of different ways to become sober, including smart recovery, talk to your GP, all of that stuff. But for us, the 12-step program is what's worked for us just for today. We talk about responsibility, and as part of that program, you know, we take a lot of ownership as to why we decided to do the things that we did. And it's a really beautiful therapeutic kind of way of looking at your behaviors and all of that. However, does the hospitality industry, is there some responsibility? Does it even matter? But does there need to be a bit more of responsibility and accountability from the industry for creating the storm that we are now in with the menace of substance abuse? Does it even matter who's responsible? Is it the case of like, well, do you know what? It doesn't matter where it started. We need to change. Or, I mean, for you, Adam, have you gone through those processes of thinking like, well, I'm only this way because of the industry, because of this? I mean, I know I did in the beginning. I was very much like that character Andy in Boiling Point, you know, in the series where he's sat there with his beer going, I haven't even got a restaurant, it's all your fault, that bitterness and that. I mean, where do you stand on that when it comes to responsibility?
There's been a lot of bitterness, but you can't, it's difficult. And I've thought about this long and hard over the time that I've been in recovery and not all of everything else that I've gone through. And I think it's easy to blame the industry, but it's like I said before, it's everybody has a choice, right? And we can have a choice. It comes down to addiction. You don't wake up one day and think, I'm going to be an addict, do you? You don't. Yes, there are contributing factors, but through doing the 12-step program and looking at myself, it was all related around myself. Yes, I'd look at stuff and say, well, why have they got this and I haven't? Why is this? Why is that? I could do that all day long, but it's down to, you know, why am I an addict and why is that person not? Why do I have to do this? And why, you know, I think that for me, that came down to me as who I was as an individual. I can't necessarily blame the industry per se, but yes, it has a responsibility too. It has a responsibility for sure. And what I mean by that is that rather than, as Kris touched on right at the very beginning, you can't just cut people loose, kick them down a curb and just wash your hands of them, because that's not right. And that's where we as an industry are so irresponsible. And I strongly believe that. Mm. And I've had interviews and I said, what happens if somebody is in that situation? Would you cut them loose or not? If they say cut them loose, I don't want to work there, because that's not help. And because I've been in that situation, because it's that, you know, and I've nearly lost jobs in relapse because of that, or because I was unreliable and stuff. And I'm sure people knew what was going on, because I come in and my eyes would be wide open, and it's just like, okay, you can't hide it. But yet they were quite happy just to leave me to get on with it, that's where the responsibility for our industry lies, is that you can't just wash it under the table, and you can't just shut your eyes and say it's not going on, because it is going on. And that's where we need to stand up and actually say, what do we need to do in order to help people? And that's my honest opinion.
I just do a little mini applause. Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I mean, Kris, have you got anything to add to that? I mean, that's exactly what I believe.
So I come at this from both sides. We work with C-suite operators, and we understand the daily challenges of running businesses and managers, and we also work with the individuals who are struggling as well. So it's challenging for me, because on one hand we can be quite righteous and say that if someone's got a drug problem or an alcohol problem or an addiction problem of any kind, then they should remain employed and we should provide them with the support, etc., which is what we would expect to see from a great employer. But also at the same time, on the other hand, what happens if that person doesn't want help? And that's having an impact on your livelihood, and that's putting additional pressures on the rest of your team. There's this. It's a really, really challenging subject, because if it's something like depression or anxiety, for example, in my experience, firstly, getting someone to speak about it is the challenge and the stigma. But then ultimately, once they realize they're unwell, 9 times out of 10, they want to get help. They don't want to be depressed. They don't want to feel highly anxious. They want to recover and they want to get better. When we're talking about addictions, again, from my experience, you can insist that someone gets help, but they might not necessarily want to get better. They might not necessarily be at that stage, no?
Yeah, and I'm like, because it's like, I get it, I understand that, but surely as somebody has a moral, yes, and again, I can only speak from myself. When I relapsed, I wasn't in that time I had sobriety. Ultimately, I wasn't ready to surrender. That's clear, because I relapsed and my relapse went on for time. But you're right, Kris, in that you have to want to get help yourself, for sure. But somebody needs to give you that hand to say, here you go. That's the issue, is that so many people, in my opinion, don't give that hand. And that's ultimately where it lies. Yes, if somebody constantly, I really struggle with this, is that if somebody doesn't want to get help, where do you go? That's a big problem,
And sorry, just from that perspective, yes, that greater awareness of support mechanisms is right, but it's interesting, isn't it, that bearing in mind the journey that you've been on and the recovery steps that you've taken, and yet you say, if someone comes to me and needs help, I don't know where to go. Like it's no, just shows.
I don't know where to go if somebody doesn't want to get help and they constantly keep. That's what I mean, and I get quite emotional about that, as you can see, because it's like ultimately that becomes a big problem, and it's like, how do you? That's where I have a difficulty, is that if somebody what can I do? What can I do? What can I do better to help that person? But I come at it from an angle of who I am now and what I was like, and it's really tough.
I thought when you just said, Kris, you were explaining about people with mental health challenges, depression, anxiety, and they realize that they're unwell. And when they realize they're unwell, they'll accept help. And I think maybe one of the challenges is that people don't look at addiction as being unwell, as being a disease, because the challenge is, because it's around something that other people do, and it's around something that, it's something that other people do in society in terms of drinking, And in our industry, drinking to excess, and add into that drug taking to excess, although this, instead of looking at that person who is like me, absolutely destroyed, got absolutely nothing. By the time I got fired from my job, which sounds really strange, but I wasn't wearing makeup anymore, which was a big thing for me. It was a real big red flag. Suddenly I'm not wearing makeup when I always had quite a lot of pride in the way I looked. I'd lost weight. I wasn't showering. I was so I was so anxious. I was so on you never mind fight or flight. I was ready at any point. I was so unwell. Like I was hallucinating because I was so burnt out, because the reason I was drinking and taking drugs was because of how burnt out I was. I was clearly unwell, but because there were substances involved, because there was alcohol involved, see you later. And I think maybe that's one of the big things that we need to start looking at, rather than thinking of, because I felt like I've shared many a time, like a failure. I'd failed as being the type of person who can use and drink and function. That was my first takeaway. Instead of somebody looking at me and going, God, she's really unwell. And maybe that's something we need to change the narrative around. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So during the conversations with these professors who wrote this study, and we can load it up at the website so that people can see a copy of this as well, but I was talking to them about the normalization of drug and alcohol use, and how we don't tend to offer the support for a problem that is driven in part by high demands and low resources and lack of skill, etc. And they said, yeah, but if you look at any high performance industry, other than industries like, for example, sports, where you get tested, and even still drugs get found, they're just different types of drugs. They're like, steroids, etc. But if you look at banking or the finance sector, where you're trading, or if you look at construction, or any industry that requires you to push beyond your human boundaries, what's naturally, on average, because everyone's different and everyone's resilience levels, but if you start to look at different industries whereby they start to see the similar pressures, they pointed out to me that actually you see this seeking behavior. And I think that, yes, going back to what you're saying, yes, there is we need to be able to, again, I think it's the same thing over and over again. We need to know where the support systems are. We need to be able to normalize the conversation and allow that person the space to go, actually, perhaps I'm not well, and perhaps I do need help, and to know exactly where to go to get that help, and to understand that others have been on that journey before and it's not impossible, I think is important. But I think we also need to a lot of that is very sort of reactive and in the moment. We do need to get to the stage where actually we are starting to address the reasons why people are having to use these high performance substitutes in the meantime, both uppers and also at the end of the shift, where we talk a lot about cocaine or a lot of things like this, but actually ultimately it's that alcohol use as well at the end of the night, where you can't sleep because your body and your brain is wired and you're full of adrenaline and you haven't had those regular rest and recovery periods. So again, we need to be pragmatic and looking at actually how do we ensure that our teams aren't doing clopens, aren't finishing at 2 o'clock in the morning.
I do not miss a clopen, that's for sure.
So there needs to be better awareness of laws and legal parameters as well, because no matter what country you're in, that's not legal. 11 hours between your finish to your open is breaching law. If you don't have stress reduction policies in place and steps to reduce stress within the workplace, which is one of the leading drivers of burnout and the use of substances, then again, you're breaching the law. And these things are things that businesses don't adhere to, both inside this sector but outside as well. This isn't industry specific, although it's common. These need to be looked at.
I do think, though, that hospitality, and again, I know it is changing in that, but hospitality always has felt like the Wild West. It's always felt above the law. I mean, it just has. And like you said, I think even you just explaining that these things are breaches of practice, breaches of law. I know about the 11-hour thing. I'd be interested to know if we walk down, like we're in Bath right now, if I walked down the street in Bath and went to like 10 restaurants and pubs and asked them if they knew that that was law, how many of them would go, yeah, I know, and I make sure I abide by it.
Most people don't know it's legal. We ask it during our training and people go, what?
I didn't know.
Adam's going to go readjust his rota quickly.
It's different out here right now. It's different here.
Say, you're in Dubai. You're in I'm sure they've got different different things. But yeah, I mean, I think it is a problem that one of the things that you were just saying though about, obviously we're not unique as an industry, as much as we like to think we are. The difference is, I liken this to like the emergency services in terms of the adrenaline and the rush, like it's hilarious in the one way, well, not as in dark humor. We're talking about, meat and two veg versus saving people's lives. But it feels that way often in a kitchen, Adam, you'll know this, you've got tickets, you've got people screaming at you, you've got waiters not running the food. It feels like life and death. The NHS have got incredible support systems in place for people who are in addiction. And I know this because I know people in the rooms who they have procedures in place, they have support, they have come back to work, interviews and stuff like that. So it's possible, is what I think I'm saying, it's possible to have an industry and, we are creating a problem, and that's what the NHS is saying. We know that we're aware that there's a problem, but we are putting stuff into place. And I think, again, it's one of those, I often say, if I said to a boss, I need Wednesday at 4:00 off because I got therapy, and I'm quite out and loud about if I've got therapy. If I say I put it in my calendar, I'm like, I'm at therapy. I had a session yesterday, 3:00, got therapy. Would I put a message in thing saying at 4:00 I've got an AA meeting? And should we be encouraging that? Is that one of the things that we should be doing, allowing that?
Sorry, I'll be honest. When I first started talking about my addiction and all of that, I had family members who saying, "Are you sure that's the right thing to do? And you sure?" And it's like, and even now, I said that I've got to leave work to come because I'm doing this, and I'm quite open about it. Now I'm quite open about it, but I do that not because I want people to feel sorry and it worries me. I do it because I want to help people. That's first and foremost. So I think but you're always going to get people that look at it and say, you're a loser, or you're a bum, or you're a junkie, or this, that's life. But you can't stop being who you are. And I don't think hiding behind that, being honest about it, as you know, Michelle, it's about honesty, right? The 12-step programming is about being honest. And we have to be honest about it. We do these things. That's what keeps us inside the triangle, keeps us on the straight and narrow. And that's what we have to do, I think. So to say that you're doing that is a good thing, in my opinion. And the other people and employers should embrace that and not make you feel that stigma, as Kris has spoken about. There shouldn't be a stigma around it. Why? Yeah. Who has the right to judge you or to say that? People should be open about it. If they want to be open about it, that's the thing also, is that if people want to be open, you can't force somebody, and that's the right thing. You know what I mean?
There is literally no better employee than somebody in recovery, FYI. If you want someone to come in on time, be honest. I mean, like, never imagine how well we'd have done in our careers, Adam, had we been.
One thing I was proud of is that I was 99.9% on time, but that's because I hadn't been to bed.
Love that.
I know I'm trying to make light of it. It's very serious. It is very serious.
But it is quite ridiculous, the shame that we all have with kind of coming out and saying like, yeah, I'm actually in recovery, where that's the exact employee you want. On time, compass mentors, we'd follow through on things, we're trustworthy.
But I also think it takes, as I've said before, it takes to be honest about it. It takes somebody that's stronger to say, actually, this is who I am today, and this is what helps me, and this is what makes me a better person, which in turn makes you a better employee, or a better boss, or a better this, or a better that. To actually stand up and to say that takes a lot of balls, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think that's true of any mental health condition.
Sure.
You know, being able, I mean, coming back from that and being able to kind of say that, you know, these are the challenges that I've been through and these are the things that I've done that have helped me. And again, it just kind of creates that culture of support and resources rather than shame and stigma.
I also think employers should embrace that, because it means that they can help others within the organisation. And, you know, in turn, by helping others, that helps their business or helps your business. And I think that's where the change can become quite dramatic in that respect. You know,
absolutely.
Then other people see it, you know, God forbid it goes on in people's restaurants. That's not what I'm saying, but I'm saying that if you have the knowledge is power. If you have that to help somebody within their business, which in turn helps their business, you know, I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, I mean, we shared a figure, £7.3 billion lost because of unproductivity due to alcohol misuse. And, you know, we had some quite fiery comments back, you know, like, well, is this about the person or is it about the business and the money? And, you know, effectively that is, you know, that's what we were saying, you know, at the end of the day, as businesses, you can make the decision to pretend it's somebody else's problem and hope that somebody else figures it out and sorts it. But if we're not, the bottom line is affected, you know, because...
But you're also playing with people's lives, because if you're 100%. Quite willing to... there's no illusions that this kills people. And I've seen people over the last 18 months lose their lives because of it.
Yeah.
That's the reality of where it is. Now, if you're as an employer, you're prepared to you're prepared to brush it under the carpet and think that it doesn't matter. Well, you need hanging. You need hanging. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's the way I see it. I become quite vocal about that because I've seen it. I've heard about it. And I think it, I just find that crazy. Yeah. Maybe that's because I am an addict or a recovering addict. So I look at it differently.
So I suppose, I mean, one of the big things for me is, and we touched upon it, but I'm really keen to, I'm curious really to understand, like if we as caring individuals or as employers suspect that someone is struggling with addictions, and we even have the opportunity to have a courageous conversation and say to them, look, I think you might be struggling and I'd like to offer some help. What do we do in the situation where someone turns around and says, I don't need help, I'm quite okay, thank you, with it? Yeah. What's the protocol? How do we, what's the process that allows us to be able to follow something without emotion, without fear of getting it wrong or right, and just allows us to be consistent in our approach?
So I've done.
I was going to say, I'm glad you asked that, Kris. I think Adam and I have got the exact answers for you. Adam?
It was at a place I was working, and there was a pattern, if I could speak properly, a pattern performing over a number of months on a Monday, and it was getting steadily worse. And you could see well, for me, I understand, again, through my experiences, I could see it. So it was after days off and it was happening. So you don't go like a bull in a china shop or a sledgehammer. You slowly start a conversation. This is what I did. And I can only speak from my experiences, right? And I started the conversation, and over a period of time, he said, no, it's all good. There's nothing wrong. Then it kept happening. And so the conversation went on over, if I said a 5-week period, and at the end of that conversation, he actually said, you're good at this, aren't you? Because I could see it and I offered to help him. And that was the issue, right? Is that he knew that I knew, but yet he wasn't ready to surrender at that time until I'd had a further conversation about it. And I told him my story because I knew. And that was the catalyst. Ultimately, he he said he wanted help. He didn't want help, and that was the thing, right? And he left soon after that, not because of what we were doing or anything. I offered to give him time off. I offered to take him to meetings. I offered to do a lot for him, but he wasn't ready to surrender. But I think you have to keep, if you can see that, you have to keep chipping away. And I don't know the answer to how those conversations continue, or I think you have a gut feeling, right? And I think, as Michelle said, if you're recovering, or you're in the 12-step fellowship, or whatever fellowship, as Michelle said, then you have an understanding of that. And I think that's where the training comes in from that perspective. And I don't know why I get so emotional about it, but that's the way it is, right?
Yeah, because it's people's lives, and also because you've been that person. We've lived that life, I mean, for me, there's the theory that only an addict can help an addict. Only someone who's walked in those shoes can help another. And I think in a way, it's quite prevalent for a lot of people with a lot of mental health challenges, in as much as that it's about empathy and it's about compassion, isn't it? And that really helps. But I think for me, one of the things that employers can do, I'm not saying to them like, well, that everybody needs to hire somebody who's in recovery. The most important thing is compassion, first off, is lead with that compassion and understanding. Take away as much as you can the anger, the blame, and just have that, we use the word curious. I love that word. Let's have a curious conversation. And for me, if I'd been sat down and immediately been told, your job is safe, it is not about that, but we're concerned and we want this conversation, the defenses immediately don't, because if someone says, "Yo, do you want to can we have a chat?" The defense, "Oh no, I'm fine, chef. Fine, chef." No. And I think that's true of any kind of conversation around behaviors and mental health and stuff like that. I think a really important thing is evidence. I think is going with some evidence, and again, it's not with accusatory evidence, but it's like, look, I've noticed that you've started to make a few mistakes, there was that mistake last Tuesday and it was fine, we sorted it, but that's really not like you. What is there something should we be doing something different? Can we, just really kind of pull it. But if you're going in with a bit of evidence as well, that kind of means, well, what you on about, and again, it's not going in going, you messed up on Tuesday. Why? It's going, hey, you did something that was really out of character on Tuesday. Should we be doing something different as a team, and allowing that space to be open?
But the patterns were he was coming in late. He was becoming erratic. His work was suffering, and like you say, you have to have the facts, because you can't. There's no you can't accuse somebody. That's the worst.
Absolutely not. I think having a really open dialogue about supporting and resourcing. I mean, in your staff areas, just having it really open, having a huge poster, which I will be producing soon, have a huge poster that says, if you are in trouble, call this number. Let's not make it a little, I'm going to slide that number over the table. Change the culture and change it from the top. And I think actually, before we even have these conversations, one of the most powerful things a business owner can do and a leader is look at their own behaviors and relationships. I'm not telling them to stop drinking or using, crack on. But what are you doing in front of your team? What is the culture? What is the acceptance? Where is the line? Because when I was fired by somebody that I had drank with, that blew my mind. I was like, hang on a second. My takeaway from that isn't that I'm being fired because of drinking. It's because I'm being fired because I can't drink and handle it the way that everyone else can. So what is your actual culture in the whole business? And then, do you know what? When instead of us having a culture of acceptance of excess and coming in on a Tuesday and hangover and let's all have bacon sandwiches because we were all smashed with the GM last night, suddenly these conversations feel easier. Easy is probably not the right word, but more natural. And Kris, you're the expert. What do you think when it comes to these challenging conversations, because it's the same if people are going through a lot of mental health challenges, isn't it?
Yeah. Firstly, can I just say, I don't like the term expert. It makes me feel deeply uncomfortable.
Sorry, you're the The thought leader? What about that? Thought leader? Is that one?
Yeah. I don't know. Like, I was just one guy, similarly to you, put your hands up and started putting your head above the parapet and said, this ain't right. Let's do something about it. I'm going to Google what defines an expert later, because obviously I'm embroiled in data and chatting about this on a daily basis. So does that I don't know. Anyway,
you're not an expert. You are heavily experienced in providing training and support to hospitality leaders who are having difficult. That took significantly longer to say.
Yeah, it does. But I feel it's more accurate. Like, I'm lucky I don't experience imposter syndrome, but I definitely get uncomfortable at expert. But
couldn't be less of an expert, listeners. Don't go to him if you want an expert opinion. He isn't one.
Thank you very much. No, from my perspective, I think you're right. Make sure that you do have a consistent approach. Like Adam, you had a consistent approach with your example, and it might be that people aren't immediately ready to say, I have an addiction problem, or I have problems with my finances, or I have a mental health issue. They might not just be ready for that stage, whether that's to do with personal experience, whether that's to do with culture or the way they were brought up. It might just not be something that has even come easy, but knowing that your approach and your consistency of your approach is key. I think leading from example, Michelle, you made a great point, is what is your relationship like with these products? If you are a recreational drug user and you can drink, then absolutely fine. But I think the very definition of an addict is that actually when it becomes a need in order to be able to function. And if that's the case, then perhaps use your experience, take courage in the fact that if you start this process yourself, you might be able to help another 10 people who'll be struggling with this. And we often say when we're looking at strategies in terms of being able to get engagement from teams, it has to start at the top. And if it's not starting at the CEO of the company, then it's not dead in the water, but it's a lot harder. It's a lot harder. Knowing where to look for those signposting. So you've mentioned posters. We have just designed a whole bank of posters for people to download free for a year. And so I think a nice collaborative poster specifically around drug and alcohol addiction, or any addiction for that matter. Let's be honest.
Yeah.
If you're bitten by addiction, it doesn't sound as heavy perhaps as drugs or alcohol, but when vapes first came out, I could not stop vaping. I went from being a non-smoker to almost a vape every 2 days, and I was becoming seriously unwell. Like, my respiratory system was knackered. I'm not one of these people who can naturally just go with it. I had my asthma attack in 17-18 years. I knew it wasn't great for me, but I couldn't stop. So I get addiction, and being able to have someone you can speak to, because the first thing you say when you're puffing on these little pretty colored thingies that smells like tutti frutti or whatever it is, someone goes, oh, for fuck's sake, you're addicted to that. Oh, oh, Jesus Christ. Immediately you're shamed, right? So to be able to have resources where you can go, look, it sounds a bit weird, but I'm addicted to brushing my teeth or something, whatever it might be, no matter how trivial it may seem to you, to have a resource or a number you can call. And that could be the Burnt Chef support service. It could be an internal EAP scheme. It can be use of peer support networks, which, our ambassadors such as yourself, Michelle and Adam, I know that you previously have spoken to people who've struggled with their addictions, and you both do quite outwardly now. So knowing where to look and being able to use those resources and being able to share your experiences of using those resources, I think is key. And knowing that it might not be today, it might not be tomorrow, it might not be this year, but at some stage, something of that process will hit at the right point for someone. And that's what will make the difference. That will start them on their journey. And then all of a sudden, that then is then paid on and paid on and paid on. So that's from my experience, what I would suggest. But I definitely do. I find this more of a challenging subject than other subjects, purely because it does require that it can't be a one-sided thing. And Adam, as your experience and your example showed is you can be consistent with your approach, and ultimately that person can either decide to take your hand and follow you into support, or they feel that the pressure to get to the support is too much, and they don't feel it's the right time, so leave. So know that you can't save everyone, but ultimately just one person.
Yeah.
If you can save one, that's so much more than not at all, right?
Absolutely. And I think that's it. I think it's our responsibility to start creating environments where that kind of behavior is abnormal opposed to normal. And let's stop allowing that to be the norm, because that is very much something that we've all experienced. And yeah, I think like you said, it's something, it's not, businesses have got a decision here. It's not going anywhere. The devastating menace of substance abuse, of alcoholism, of vaping, of caffeine addiction, we're run on stimulants, our whole industry, and it ain't going anywhere. So we've got a decision right now. We can either pretend it's not happening and continue to lose incredible employees day in and day out, whether it's to other industries, whether it's to, stress, burnout, whether it's to death, that's what we're talking. Or we can go, this ain't going anywhere. So what is my part in making it change? And if businesses, or when businesses decide to make that decision, get in touch. Because with myself, with the Burnt Chef Project, work with Adam, all three of us are making sure that we're part of the change that needs to happen. Gentlemen, I could talk to you for many more hours, but I shan't, because you have busy lives. Adam has a kitchen to get back to. And Kris needs to Google what the term expert is. So we've all got busy. Any parting words from you, sirs?
Just very grateful to be able to have a voice to share experiences, to give people strength and hope. I think that's the most important thing. So I'm very grateful for that, for sure. Thank you so much.
I'm very grateful for you too. Anything from you, Sir Kris? Don't call me sir.
No. For me, I don't know. I this is a marathon, not a sprint. It's going to take time, and it's very, very easy for us to say, oh, we can do it next week, or it's someone else's problem. But if you're listening to this now and you feel even the tiniest little bit inspired, or you're curious to learn more, there's free resources that we offer as the Burnt Chef Project on our e-learning. There's free support systems as well. Michelle and Adam are fantastic advocates for this. They can share their own experiences. Being hospitality veterans in the trade is also experiencing their own struggles. So reach out, ask. There's no one's ever going to say to you, what a fucking stupid question. We're going to say, okay, cool. Let's see if we can help. It sounds so cliche, even when it just popped into my head, but be the change you want to see. It's true. Like, let's start living the industry that we want to see and believe, and it will become a lot easier when there's multiple people pushing this ball up the hill.
God, yeah. The true power in the ripple effect, there really is. And, it just takes those tiny changes for big things to happen. Thank you both so much for joining us today, and for being so open and honest. And I know for a fact that this conversation will have resonated with people. And if anybody wants to get in touch, you have got the Burnt Chef website. You've also got werecoverloudly.com, which has got links to the Burnt Chef, as well as links to other organisations. And by the end of November, we will be starting our own online peer-to-peer meetings, so that people who are in the industry, who want to kind of get a little bit of support in a safe and contained environment online. And so make sure you're following We Recover Loudly on socials for a little bit more detail about when those do launch. Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you.
Well done. Good work.
Big shine of the old halos for both of you. And I will see you both, I'm sure, very soon. Thank you.
Thank you so much. See you later.